Nettie and Mark for that fantastic video. And thank you, Nettie, also for debunking those myths. Now that we're armed with the information of how to answer any questions that come our way, let's figure out how we can attract families and youth from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to continue their adventure in scouting. My name is Trevor Bender, and along with my colleague, Amy Tadlock, both of us from the San Diego Imperial Council, we're going to be describing some of the techniques to do just that. So our journey actually begins a couple years ago. You might remember on May 8th, 2018, the church announced that at the end of December of 2019, they would end the charter relationship with Boy Scouts of America. I quickly pulled out my calendar. We had 19 and a half months to go before that date, and a lot of things ran through my mind. I was thinking there's boys in my unit that want to finish their Eagle. There's other advancements to occur. There's campouts to occur. Still 2 more summers worth of campouts and things like that. I also thought there's going to be folks that want to continue, myself included. What's that going to look like? Are we going to join units that already exist, or are we going to create new units? And a lot of ideas came about relative to that. There was ideas of successor units that would follow in the tail of an existing unit that was chartered by the church. Some people started calling them legacy units, others called them community units. And so we've had a lot of discussion on that amongst our team and the faculty preparing this conference. We all agreed that going forward, we would use the term new units to describe a unit that has the following 3 characteristics. It's largely composed of members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, meaning they came from an existing path of church participation in scouting. And largely the leaders and the boys or the youth in that program come from that community. Number 2, they are open to anybody participating. Any faith, any group could join that unit. And number 3, they're largely a Sabbath observant unit, meaning that with very few exceptions, they don't travel or camp on Sunday. So you'll hear us using that term new unit, and that's what we're describing. And many of these are created in the last quarter of 2019 and the first quarter of 2020. I suspect more will be created this summer. So that's the term. So when we realized that we're going to have to do a transition phase, Amy and I got together and we realized we needed to create a team. What we called it was a service and transition team. This was tied to San Diego Imperial Council, which has 13 stakes and about 10,000 members in it that were involved in scouting. When you realized we needed to create a brand, we needed to build something that people could latch onto. And so we're going to describe that process. Now, what we're going to describe that we did over the last 2 years is something that you could do tomorrow. It doesn't have to take that long. You just get engaged and you do some of these things and learn from what others have done and put it together. And next half hour we'll discuss that. And Mark and Nettie will share some of the things they did in Utah. First off, though, we had to come up with some goals. And there's 2 goals that kind of resonated with us that have stuck with us as a theme for this particular program. One was to ensure that every Latter-day Saint, scout, leader, and family received an invitation to continue in scouting, and that they have the information necessary to make a good decision for them in that regard. And number 2 is to assist the council and districts in identifying leaders and charter partners for future units that would serve the Latter-day Saint population that desires to remain with scouting. So those are the 2 things that we focused on. Amy?
Thank you, Trevor. I'd like to share with you our council vision for the Latter-day Saint transition. We knew that communication would be key. However, we also knew that we had 10,000 families across 13 stakes that we were trying to reach. Some regions had church leadership that was supportive of scouting, and some did not. And with the church's instruction regarding recruiting, relying on the LDS BSA committees to communicate the message about scouting opportunities to all 13 stakes would just not be possible. We had to come up with a marketing campaign with the potential to reach out to all our Latter-day Saint families. We knew the marketing campaign needed to accomplish 2 tasks. First, it had to have value content and be relevant to Scout leaders, parents, as well as members of the church. Second, we also wanted this campaign to establish a clear point of contact for the retention effort in our council. As active scouters and members of the church, Trevor and I were able to play a unique role in our council of both being connected and qualified. Through our efforts, we became the bridge between the local districts and the Latter-day Saint families. Our multifaceted marketing campaign focused on the creation of a page on the council website, social media sites on Facebook and Instagram, as well as regular newsletters sent out through MailChimp. We branded our image as Saints and Scouts. In the spring of 2019, we created an online interest survey through Google Forms and sent it out via our newsletter, Facebook page, and distributed it through our council staff and volunteers. The form was our first mass survey of the Latter-day Saint families in our council. It turned out to be extremely valuable and quite accurate. Nearly all of our potential volunteers were identified early on through that survey and are active as Scout volunteers in newly created units today. Trevor?
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, one of the items we learned very quickly is this job was too big for the two of us. And with that, armed with that information we had from the volunteers, we reached out to key leaders in each of the 13 states and invited one of them to serve as an ambassador. And what the ambassador's role was to communicate that flow of information, particularly to those units or potential units that could be existing in the boundaries of that state. Now, this was not a church calling. This was a volunteer role, and it was associated to our service and transition team at San Diego Imperial Council. And the ambassadors engaged in different levels of ways of doing so, and it was fun to interact with them and have them be involved. They were the ones, as Charles Dahlquist said, who were responsible for getting the water to the end of the road to ensure that every family had an invite to continue in Boy Scouts of America. Next, we continued our work in terms of coordinating with the national level. Now, many of you on this call have been involved in the past with quarterly calls that Mark and Charles have held during the past days as the LDS-BSA relationships team, and now coming forward as the Vanguard International Scouting Association. Those were key to get the latest information related to transition, related to what's going on. Yesterday, we launched the Religious Awards Program, those kinds of things, upcoming jamborees and events like that that are being supported by VISA, the Vanguard International Scouting Association. So get hooked up into those calls, be part of that, share that information down the road. Next, we also realized as part of our outreach effort, we couldn't just be solely focused on social media. We needed to be involved in other ways too. And one of the ways to do that was to participate as a trainer or teacher in Commissioner College and University of Scouting. I remember my first experience with this was in the LA Council on March 17th of 2018. We traveled up there and we ran into Roma and Wayne Bishop. They were giving a course on how to be strong Latter-day Saint unit commissioners. 1 year later, I was at the exact same conference teaching on how to set up your own unit as part of Latter-day Saint transition. Those kinds of connections you make at those conferences are key, and they build your network and they make it possible to establish credibility. So don't discount that. Raise your hand and teach courses at Commissioner College and University of Scouting related to transition and creating new units. Also, we realized that the monthly roundtables were a fantastic venue for us to attend. And so Amy and I divided up our various districts in San Diego Imperial Council, and we'd each go to a different one each month, and we'd give presentations relative to roundtables. Sometimes they would just give us 5 minutes to make announcements. Sometimes they'd give us a half an hour. A couple times we got the entire show as a big rock item with lots of Q&A. We're able to debunk myths real time with an audience of 40 or 50 people. Fantastic way to get the word out and establish your credibility as the person to go to continue units in the going forward. Back to you, Amy.
So just like our efforts with local roundtables, we also attended district commissioner and committee meetings regularly. We would share information about possible leads in the Latter-day Saint community and in the local district where we were visiting, and seek help from that district committee to find charter partners and assign commissioners to work with these new units. We knew it would be invaluable to build connections between the local Scout leaders and the Latter-day Saint families. It was very important for us during this time to present the best that Scouting has to offer. We used our Facebook campaign to promote ways families could make a difference in their local communities through Scouting. We also focused on promoting local events from trainings to day camps and camporees. And it was very important to do all of this with a smile. Our ultimate goal was to remove the barriers to saying yes to Scouting. Okay, Trevor, where'd you go?
I disappeared there for a second. Thank you. What we're describing here is kind of the personal service model. It's very similar to ministering. It's going out and making those connections. One of the people that I think does this so well is Mark Francis. He's been leading the LDS-BSA team, the last director of that group, since 2013. Amy and I first met him in September of 2015 at a little Philmont camping experience at Mattagway Scout Reservation, San Diego Imperial Council. Amy and I had not met each other yet, and we were interacting with Mark, who was leading us on how to do this transition effort, which would be so key for when we started doing it in real life a couple years later. He just participates so well in so many things. You see him on different calls. You see him as participating in a variety of outreach on Facebook. It's just fantastic. I love that model. I've tried to model my efforts related on what I see him doing. And you can do the same thing. You can follow the lead of others and just go out there and start talking and share that example with them. And I'm going to share a few ideas in the next few minutes about how to do that. Each of us can be a catalyst for change to motivate others to recruit members to stay in scouting and in a variety of roles. We talked about attending roundtables and other district outreach efforts. That's a lot where the rubber hits the road is at the district, which in our council, the districts and the stakes were almost related one-to-one. So we would come up with targeted distribution lists of contacts that we wanted to make, people we wanted to reinforce relationships with, or mailings or emailings to go out to groups to give them the latest information on transition. Behind me is a traveling display that we would use at various events, information shares or roundtables. This particular one was made by one of our ambassadors, Bryce Hall, who is a fantastic ambassador for scouting. Many of you have probably seen him making posts on Facebook pages. He's regularly posts on about 10 different scouting and Latter-day Saint pages just to get the word out there about what can be done, the possibilities and the joys of scouting. As you go out and build your brand relative to scouting and relative to transition, there's some things that are important in the personal contact area. Don't forget, when you send out emails, include a signature block that describes your role, gives information on people can reach out to you, maybe your phone number if you're willing to. If you look at all of the professionals in scouting and you receive an email from them, every single one of them has a very colorful signature with the BSA logo. And it's a fantastic way to recognize what role they play and how if you can reach out to them for specific information on different topics. We should do the same as volunteers. Don't forget about having a business card. Here's one that Amy and I put together, and we put it out there, and we would hand these out like candy. And what that did is it made it possible for people to realize, you know what, these people are really working hard. They're doing this thing. This is for real. I'm going to listen to what they have to say, and I'm going to keep that card. And if a question comes up from me or from somebody I know, I'll reach back out to them. Don't forget to have a name tag right here. Another item of your role and your commitment to the program. I think these are all great ways for us to do that. And when you build your brand, it's amazing the success that you'll have in having people reach back to you. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, but Amy, I'll turn it back to you for the roles that you had as state primary president.
Thanks. So it was while I was serving as my state primary president, which, by the way, is the reason I'm so deep into scouting. I found that there was no substitute for face-to-face conversations. The role of state primary president is a very close match to the role of scout commissioner. I quickly found that in both roles, that as tempting as it was to utilize email to rapidly spread my message, it was not as effective. The best way to reach out to those who might be interested in scouting is one at a time, face to face. It will take time, but the results are well worth the efforts. We knew that as the church transitioned to a new program, the big question would be, how can my child do both scouting and the children and youth programs? As parents of children and youth, Trevor and I were both aware of the time commitments necessary to both programs. We also had a testimony that the two programs could be complementary. Last fall, we met together prior to a council commissioner meeting and, beginning with prayer, asking for guidance, we drafted our first mapping of the Cub Scout and Scouts BSA requirements to the new guidelines for the church and youth programs. Let me show you what that looks like. Give me just a second. Okay, so this was the mapping that we came up with. And this was definitely a joint effort. It took both of our brains to come up with a way that we could accurately represent all of the benefits of scouting and how they can fit in so well to the 4 areas of development that the church was focusing on. So as you see here, we worked on establishing a plan, a way to coordinate various requirements. This one is showing an example of the Cub Scout requirements to how they might fit in for a family also wanting to work on their goals for the children and youth program. So let me click through to the Scouts BSA slide. Trevor.
All right, thank you so much, Amy. This particular view of Scouts BSA is focused on an Eagle Scout or a person who's trying to become Eagle Scout. So you'll see the merit badges that are the 21 key merit badges that one goes after, the 11 Eagle required, and they're tied to the 4 areas of the church program of spiritual, social, physical, and intellectual development. This is a fabulous tool. You take a look at that mapping. There's a bunch of other ideas there too, and it can be a great idea generator with a parent or a church leader working with the youth who might be struggling with their goals in the new church program. If they're active in scouting or want to continue to be or just consider it, these are some goals where you could do both at the same time. So we talked a little bit about creating new units. I want to go into that a little bit more now. A new unit will serve as a very convenient entry point for others to continue in scouting. There's something about being involved with your friends that you already know, for moms to be able to share carpools with others that they know, to be as adults on a committee with others that you know from your ward or stake. And so this is one of the real attractions to creating new units. And it's important to be involved as a leader, as a change maker in that process early on. It's just, you got to be out there and help identifying folks and giving them support and encouragement, answering their questions. You also need to identify charter partners. We're going to have another session later today that goes all about that process. And so I'll save those comments until then. But one of the best ways to do that is to hold information shares and kickoff meetings. And when you do that, it's important to describe a few things. So I'll just share a few props here. This particular piece of wood was given to me by Mark Francis when I was up at the last LDS symposium, LDS BSA symposium in Salt Lake City. So one piece of wood has the Boy Scout symbol on it, the other one has the temple in Salt Lake City. They link together like this. Fun prop to show to other people. They stand together individually on a table, or they fall apart if they're not connected. We've left the charter partnership relationship as an institution, other heritage for many of us. So that's key there. When we go to these information shares, I'd show that prop. I'd show the panel that Bryce Hall made. We'd also show these scan sheets so people get more information on different topics. My favorite issue of the magazine last year was September 2019. Many of you maybe remember this, a whole article on resiliency. What program builds better resiliency in our youth and scouting? Great connection there. I've got 2 copies of this book, one of my favorites, Century of Honor. I keep one that's pristine on the coffee table in the living room, and the other one travels with me everywhere I go so I can show it off. So many good questions have come from people flipping through that book, many of them who are friends of the church, who are seeing scouting and the church combined together for the first time. Back to you, Amy.
So as the end of 2019 began to approach and families started realizing that the end of the church charter partnership was nearing, we held the information nights that Trevor just mentioned. It has been such a delight to work one-on-one with these new units as they have grown and developed over the last few months. My favorite family was one with a youth who had become less active in church, but was still attending scouting. When his family signed up with a new unit that would continue into 2020, I was really excited, knowing that this youth would still be interacting with families who would help him to reach his potential. There have been many steps in helping to create these new units, many of which are new issues that Latter-day Saint scouting leaders had not faced before. Meeting one-on-one with new unit leaders has allowed us to resolve concerns and hopefully make the transition easier on the adults so that they can focus on the experience they want to provide for the youth. Issues like finding a charter partner, finding a meeting location, and providing them with proof of insurance from the BSA, and unit finances are just a few. Helping new leaders go step by step through the process of choosing a bank Being aware of the costs associated with nonprofit accounts and selecting committee members to be signatories can be a huge benefit for leaders who may be hesitant about taking on a new role as a Scout leader. Trevor.
Yeah, so let me just share a few experiences that I had in helping to create a new unit in North San Diego County. So I live in Oceanside. I'm part of the Vista Stake. There's a whole corridor of stakes along the I-78 corridor, which stretches from the coast to Escondido. And I knew going into this that we were gonna create a unit up there, maybe two, to service that population. And in my heart, I had really hoped that a good friend of mine by the name of Eric Gimmel would be that scoutmaster. And I approached him gently a couple times, and it's a tough job, creating a unit outside of the church. The church umbrella provided so much for us as Scout leaders in terms of transition planning, recruiting, staffing, fundraising. It was amazing. And a couple times Eric told me, it's just too big. It's too big of a challenge. And then he had a change of heart in October, November timeframe. And he says, you know what, I'll do this if you're my committee chair. And so he and I linked arms and we created a unit. It was called 2020 in honor of the year. And right now we have 57 Scouts and 20 Cubs in the unit. It's a great unit. Over 35 volunteers from on the adult side helping us out, many of them with decades of experience. Really, really cool. One of the things that I noticed, I mentioned about this branding effort, and so has Amy. From the period of early December until early January, daily, she and I were getting phone calls, text messages, emails from members of the church saying, what do I do? It's almost January 1st. Where's the nearest unit? And all total, we created 8 new units across San Diego Imperial Council, 4 packs, 4 troops that can be serviced as population. We feel good about that, but there's gaps in the geography. There's some areas that people would have to travel 50 miles to get to it. We'd love to fill those gaps with additional units. But because of that branding effort, people know who to reach to when they're ready to do so. And we continue our recruiting efforts to this day to fill those holes and allow people to join in. Now, one idea you might consider if you're in a dispersed population situation like that is having what we call Eagle patrols. So in my case, in Vista Oceanside area, we had a strong unit. We met at a barn very similar to the Francis barn. It's a great place, location. But some of the units, some of the servants in population were further away in San Marcos and Escondido, and they couldn't make it. One particular group had 10 boys who were just months away from finishing their Eagle, and the travel distance was too hard. And so we created what we called an Eagle Patrol. We had 2 assistant scoutmasters who served in that particular location. They would meet weekly with the boys and help them along that path to Eagle without them having to travel 20 miles across a crowded freeway to get to where the home troop was meeting. And then we would service them with Eagle Scout course or boards of review and also courts of honor later on as they progressed. So that's an option that kept them from having to find their own charter partner in a remote location for a very small unit by attaching to another unit. Okay.
So we've talked a lot this morning about the steps that Trevor and I took as part of the San Diego Imperial Council's Latter-day Saint transition team. And for those of you serving in a district or council capacity, this information hopefully has been very helpful to you in moving forward with retention and recruitment efforts in your area. However, if you're a unit leader looking to grow your unit, we would like to talk specifically about steps that you can take to recruit. Number one for a reason, this is so important. Get to know your district leaders. These leaders have become my closest friends. They care about our youth and they care about you. They are also able to provide a host of materials, contacts, and experience in recruiting and in other areas of scouting. Check out your local roundtables as well. This is a great way to network with your local district and unit leaders. Some of the resources and materials available at your local council, it can be flyers that you can have printed out for distribution. So be sure and check them out. They also have table displays and things that you can use to set up recruiting displays at schools or other community events. Okay, number 2, promote your unit on social media. Now, this can be a concern for privacy-minded parents, so be careful not to identify youth by name or post pictures of children whose parents have opted out of a photo consent. but having a public social media page or group can be an extremely valuable recruiting tool. When families in your community see the fun activities and service your unit provides, they will show interest. Number 3, host several Bring a Friend nights or have other special pack or troop events to invite new families to come and check out your unit or activity. Families who are attending a recruiting event are covered by BSA insurance in case of a mishap, but you must be following all the safety guidelines of scouting. Number 4, hit up the local schools. Place flyers, attend open house and back to school nights, not just once, but multiple times a year. Our council did a recent survey where they showed that most people who have joined scouting have only had one ask. So if they weren't able to do it at that time, they wouldn't have joined. However, if we make multiple asks and multiple opportunities, our recruiting efforts will definitely grow. You can also participate in local events, parades, and even set up booths at the community farmers market. Often your district is able to make arrangements for the booth space so that it's free of charge. Do not ask local priesthood leaders to promote your unit in church meetings or activities, in the ward bulletin or on ward or stake social media accounts. But do share multiple invites to activities with friends, neighbors, and those in your community. Trevor.
Thanks, Amy. So to wrap this portion up, as you go out and spread the word about scouting and continuing in it, you will have success. And when that success occurs, the important thing to do is to reinforce that success. Participate yourself in that new unit, either as a new unit commissioner or perhaps on the committee or in some other role. Also, as that goes about, tell the others about the success of this new unit and invite other families and others to join with it and leaders to participate. As others see the success grow, then they may want to replicate that in other areas within your boundaries. As Amy mentioned, there's kind of a missionary analogy to all of this. We know that most people do not take the missionary discussions until they've been invited about a dozen times is what it takes. And similar for scouting, it's okay if someone says no to your invite or we're not interested at this point. They may change later in life and have a youth that grows older and is now interested. And they'll remember that conversation and reach back out to you. You never know where those conversations are going to go. So just open your mouth and have them. And know too, now that our recruiting restrictions from last year no longer apply. As members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we are welcome, and as Boy Scout volunteers, we are welcome to go ahead and recruit other members of the church to participate in scouting. That is not a restriction like it was last year. So go ahead and make those invites and encourage your friends to participate. With that being said, let me turn it over to Mark and Nettie Francis, who are going to share some of the experiences they had in a similar role up in Utah.
Thank you, Trevor and Amy. That was a tremendous presentation. We are so blessed to have great volunteers like Trevor Bender and Amy Tadlock. And we know that there's thousands of other great volunteers all across the nation. So together, we are going to make this successful. We're going to continue to provide wonderful opportunities for Latter-day Saints to continue their involvement in scouting. I just want to share with you some beautiful patches as a little segue before we get into our topic. First off, this is the patch that you'll receive if you become a charter member. Beautiful patch with the gold border. This is the patch for lifetime membership, beautiful silver border. This is a patch for annual membership with the blue border. And this patch with the green border will be available on our website for purchase. So these patches will all be sent out very soon, and the patch for purchase will be available within the next couple of weeks. We're still waiting for a couple of dynamics to be figured out before we start selling these products. The next thing I want to mention is that if you want to follow along in the workbook, we're on page 9. And finally, one of the topics that I've been asked to address is regarding recruiting new leaders and getting them trained. Charles Dahlquist and I will be sharing great detail about that this afternoon. So just whet your appetite that we'll be getting into that topic a little bit later this afternoon. So with that, I'll turn the time over to Nettie.
As far as recruiting and retaining Latter-day Saint families in units, we have had a wonderful experience in the last year starting a pack and a troop in our neighborhood. And we found during the past 18 months that there are what we call the 6 C's to successful recruiting and retaining of Latter-day Saints. So the first C is to clarify. We talked a little bit about myths and what we need to clarify with people around us as far as scouting now moving forward. Again, we can still be involved in scouting as Latter-day Saints, and some people don't understand that. One of the ways we found best to clarify with people that scouting continues is through our facts. So we took some time when we started the pack and troop to type out all the facts of our units, where we are meeting, who we are chartered by, what the cost is, who can be involved, who can join, where the meeting's going to be held, and how people register. A similar fact sheet is available on in your workbook, and if you turn there, you can see that through Mike Ball's unit. But we found that if we could clarify these things in black and white, it was very helpful. And that way we could not just share it with people, but we could hand them a printed copy of what we wanted to clarify about what we were doing here in the community.
The next C is calendar. So we developed a calendar for both our pack and our troop. Of course, it wasn't just Nettie and I that did this. We had very strong committees in both cases and a lot of volunteers helping. But the idea of having a calendar, here's a sample of our Cub Scout pack calendar. The significance of this is so that the parents can see that we're serious. We have a very clear plan. We have something outlined every single month. We have a date, we have a location. And the calendar doesn't need to have all the details. It just needs to have the essentials on it so that the parents can see, okay, these guys are serious. And then of course in our committee meetings, that's when we sort out all the details. We figure out who's going to do exactly which tasks so that when we get to the actual date, we are well prepared. Now for our Cub Scout pack, this was a little bit easier because we could decide these things as adults. On the troop side, it became a little bit more challenging because we had to involve the youth because this is their program. But I can't tell you how exciting it was to sit down with the youth for our annual planning and to talk with them about all the things that they could do. And their eyes just got bigger and bigger and bigger as we as adults started to help them understand that this was their program. This is whatever they wanted it to be. And we could go camping where they wanted to go camping. And we could go to summer camp where they wanted to go. And that was a significant adjustment from what they had experienced in the past, because in many cases, our Latter-day Saint units weren't following that boy-led program concept. And a lot of the decisions on the troop side would simply be made by the adults. And I'm not casting any blame or laying any fault on anybody, but that's just kind of how the tradition evolved over time. But as we move forward, especially those of us who start our own units, the Scouts BSA program is clearly a youth-led program.
And I just want to say that as a parent, I love when somebody hands me a calendar that I can put on my schedule and see, yes, I can do this, and this is how it's going to fit into our life. So for recruiting families and parents, having those facts and that calendar where they could see it was very helpful in getting them to be on board. It gave us a real level of validity that this was a quality event. All right, the next C is to communicate. Amy touched on this really well, but we have to communicate that there is still scouting here in our neighborhood. We did this, like Amy said, through a lot of social media, through a school recruitment night, through word of mouth. Even 9 months after we had started our pack and troop, I ran into a neighbor who lives just one street away from me. And she said, "What? You're doing scouting over there? I had no idea." You cannot communicate too much. You cannot tell people too often or in too many ways that scouting is here to stay, and communicate that with them. The most effective communication we found for recruiting families and leaders was person to person. And when we did begin our pack and troop, we handed out a lot of flyers, but the most recruitment we had was when we stood on a doorstep and I had my son with me in his uniform or my daughter with me in her uniform, and we said, "We're starting this pack, we're starting this troop, would you like to join?" And that was so helpful. And usually we would be standing on the doorstep of their friend, and their friend would be there with their parent. "Yeah, I want to do it. Yeah, that looks fun." And so the best recruitment tool we had with communication was person to person. It's okay if you just start with 1 or 2 people in your den or troop. It's going to grow. You start where you are and you bring those people in one at a time.
Our next C is contribute. We realized early on that we needed everybody to be involved. And what we discovered was that some families are so busy. We didn't discover this, we knew it already. Some families are just very busy. The moms and dads, maybe they're both working, or maybe it's a single parent household, or maybe the mother and father both have a heavy responsibility with their church. We get that. But our children are so important, and we needed to make sure that the parents understood how important their children are to them and to us. So we asked for their contribution of time. Now, with understanding how busy we all are and recognizing that some have so many things on their plate, we handed out rosters, and we just asked parents to volunteer initially. And many did. Many stepped up and said, you know what, I can do this, or I can do that, or I can do something else. But in some instances, we actually had to just go to those parents and say, you know what, we're so happy that your children are involved in our pack or our troop. This is how we are inviting you to contribute. And a lot of times it was just simple tasks. One mother, we simply asked her to make a flyer for our monthly pack meeting. Didn't take her a lot of time in that, and frankly, that was something that she was really good at. But to get every parent involved, giving them an opportunity to contribute, has made a huge difference in both of our units. And hence, when we have events, we always have a lot of parents show up, and they're so excited to be able to help in whatever way they possibly can.
You know, and one of the best things about inviting parents to sign up when we had those lists of duties is that they could choose what worked best for them. Do you want to just manage part of our day camp, getting the transportation for day camp? Do you want to just help manage the blue and gold? And that way, if they couldn't give something weekly, they could give something once a year. That's very doable, very viable to ask someone that. And it made everyone feel needed. And it really helps people stay committed when they have a responsibility. All right, the next C is consistent. We have to be consistent with what we're telling people that we are doing. Our first year as a pack, we had put on the calendar that we had a family camp. Well, 2 weeks away from the family camp, it looked like the weather was going to be really bad. Mark and I were both really overwhelmed. The people that were helping us were really overwhelmed. And we were like, oh, let's just cancel it. It's just our first year. But Mark said, absolutely not. We said we were having this family camp. We are going to have this family camp. And I lost some sleep. But I'll tell you, we drove up there with our family to that family camp. We had over 100 people show up and camp there with us. It was by far one of the best events we had. I am so grateful we didn't cancel that we pushed through, that we had the people who were helping us stick to what they said they were going to do. And we had a wonderful experience. So once we set a calendar, we need to be consistent. Same with our den meetings, same with our troop meetings. If we start flip-flopping and canceling here and there because we have something come up, people are going to drop out. The best way to retain families is to be consistent. Say what you mean and mean what you say.
And our final C is to connect. It was such an interesting experience for us, realizing that we didn't know a lot of the people who lived in our community. And through scouting and through opening up our doors to all youth, we started to realize that we had some great families that were not members of our church, that lived just down the street from us, that wanted to be involved in our unit. And we have developed some wonderful friendships with them. So the opportunity for us to connect with our communities is a significant outcome of our willingness to really reach out and to connect.
Surprise, the C's are over, but we end with the W, work. It takes work to recruit families and leaders to scouting. And there are definitely moments of discouragement when friends turn us down, when people say they don't want to be involved, but it is absolutely worth it. I loved in conference when the prophet said, the Lord loves effort. And absolutely, it takes effort, but it is worth it. So don't forget that it will be some work to start a new unit and to recruit these people, but it's finally, the last W is worth it. It's worth it.
And just as a final thought on my part, I'd like to say that I wish other organizations would reach out to us as parents to say how their programming can help strengthen our youth and help strengthen our youth within our own church. So I applaud all of those who are choosing to continue with scouting, because one thing I know for sure is that scouting helps all young people to draw closer to their faith tradition and draw closer to their God. Thank you.